Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I want to continue the conversation, same as the past couple of weeks. I want to continue the conversation that we've been having about studying tarot and oracle decks. And I'm sorry if I seem a bit off today, if my energy seems a bit off today. I'm feeling a little fatigued right now. I'm about to start my lady time and I am definitely feeling the effects of that right now. You might also hear my husband in the background. He's playing games with some friends right now. My daughter's actually spending the afternoon at her grandparents' house, which we are both very fortunate. We're just happy that she's able to have that experience. And we're utilizing that time. My husband's just mingling with some friends, currently just playing games online, and I decided that I really wanted to film this video while the information is still really percolating in my mind. So, like I said, we're going to continue the discussion about oracle and tarot as tools that I like to think of them as living and breathing tools. They grow along with you, and they're not shy to grow and change as you grow and change. So this of course is going to be my opinion currently on a lot of these decks. And I just really want to start with the wild unknown archetypes. So I know in my previous video I didn't mention the bones of the Bonestone and Earth Flesh Tarot in that video, because I did use it in the demo in the very first video that I created, like as a part of the series. I guess you could call it a series at this point now. And I wasn't originally going to talk about the oracle decks that I included along in that demo video because, well, I spoke about it during the demo. I, however, realized that I didn't really talk about how I like to work with the wild unknown archetypes, because I have a video actually that I did quite some time ago, just really going over how I like to work with this deck. And I realized that it's actually been quite some time since I created that video, and there's a lot of new folks, a lot of new subscribers and viewers on the channel now who might not be aware of that information. So I thought this is a great opportunity to re-talk about that, re-talk about how I like to work with the archetypes, wild unknown archetypes, or how I just like to work with archetypes in general. So I did want to talk about that a bit today. So again, this is the wild unknown archetypes. This is one of Kim Kranz's wonderful creations. And this is probably my all-time favorite oracle deck. So I'm pretty sure this deck really started a deep connection and relationship with archetypes. Archetypes are very important to me in my spiritual practice. And I noticed pretty much from the beginning that I felt a deep connection to archetypes and working with archetypes on my spiritual path. I find that when I read for others, a lot of the information that does really pop up to me is archetypal, as well as tarot numbers as well, or like the blending of numerology and tarot. That's also it's a very significant aspect of how I read tarot, is really blending its archetypes as well as the numerology, like the numerology. So what I really wanted to talk about here, and I do want to create a video about how I read the tarot, specifically the blending of numerology with the tarot and the archetypes, but what I noticed early on was I've always felt very incredibly drawn to archetypes. And how I like to work with this deck and with archetypes in general is I really like to think about the archetype and how that archetype is portrayed in myths and stories. I really like to think about key concepts that are related to that archetype, qualities that really stand out to me about that particular archetype or character, for example. And one of the best examples that I like to think about is the mother archetype, which she's right here, ironically. The archetypal energy of the mother is closely linked to the Empress card in tarot, of course. And there is, of course, a significant aspect of self-sacrifice that comes with motherhood, as well as to care for or to nurture something, to really assist it, to give it the best environment to really ensure that it's capable of growing to its full potential. And I like to always think about, well, what are some of the greatest examples of mothers in mythology or stories and storytelling? And you always go back to, I like to work with the Greek pantheon and the Greek gods and goddesses. And I always go back to the goddess Demeter, Persephone's mother. So she is an excellent example of the mother archetype, earth mother archetype, or just mother archetype. I've had some very significant breakthroughs in my own journey of motherhood, just connecting with Demeter's energy. But it's just one of the ways that I really like to work with archetypes is to really think about the characters that represent that archetype in stories and what themes they deal with, any undercurrents, reoccurring situations, especially if it's across several different myths and stories that feature a particular character, or it could be even a separate character but is still a face of that archetype. Like, what are reoccurring themes that keep happening? I always like to kind of work with archetypes that way. I hope that makes sense, but I did want to just talk a little bit about this deck, as it has been quite some time since I've really broken it down on the channel, and I know I got a lot of new faces, so I did want to share a little bit about how I work with this deck, since it is something so important to me. This is one of my favorite oracle decks. I would argue that this is it is my favorite oracle deck, honestly. It's a deck that I still use. I use it once a week typically. I will pull from this deck to figure out what kind of archetypal energy I'm working with that week. And I do, like I've mentioned on the channel, I do find that this deck, archetypes are so beneficial. They're so helpful for really anchoring a reading, as archetypes do typically, they represent major themes. So I do find them so helpful for that. And if you're interested in doing any type of archetypal work, this is a great deck to start with. The guidebook is really good too. Now, I don't need to read with the guidebook anymore. I spent a good couple of months really getting to know this deck, and I've found that ever since then I can work with this deck intuitively, but I do recommend the guidebook. I do think it's really good. So a newer deck to me, although I've had it for a few months now, this is the Cries of the Soul Oracle. It's a rock pool deck. So I purchased this to be a companion oracle deck to my personal Femme Fatale tarot that I created for myself. So I've been really enjoying getting to know this deck. The guidebook is really good too. Now, this is what I would consider more of a shadow work deck, but what I like is the keywords. So I like how, for example, this says repetitive patterns. I embrace inner and outer change. So I really like to work with this deck for empowerment. I like to use it to sort of flip the script, so to speak. And I know I've mentioned that quite a lot on the channel. A lot of the work that I've done with certain faces of the dark feminine, such as Lilith, for example, who is an excellent representation of the actual femme fatale archetype, by the way, is I really like to work with empowerment, like really working on feeling more empowered in my day-to-day life. And this is one of the best ways, I think, to work with this deck personally, in my personal experience. I like to work with this deck intuitively, and again, like I like to really pull a card for the day about any personal situations that I might be facing on that particular day. And I like to work with it as in an attempt to feel more empowered, of course. Although it's been a while since I've worked with this deck, I do have to admit, I'm not really working on empowerment right now as a theme in my life currently. Right now I've been really inspired to do deck studies currently, like working with a lot of botanical decks. I've spoken recently about how I'm having this love affair with the Viola Lux Umbra tarot deck from Layla and Olive. I'm absolutely obsessed with that deck and the Bones of the Bone Stone and Earth Flesh Tarot as well. So I've been really just soaking up that earth energy. Like and we're in Taurus season currently at the time that I'm still filming this video. So Taurus season tends to be a very lusty, very earthy kind of energy. I like to sit in that energy. It can be a little self-indulgent for me. And it's just such a beautiful energy. And May is probably one of my favorite months. Spring is my favorite season. So, and I've always enjoyed Taurus season, although this year it was a bit rough. And we'll talk more about that in my monthly roundup video, but I just tend to gravitate more towards my earthy kind of just this sensual, engaging all the five senses, kind of like my Taurus energy decks. And this month has been no different. So I've been really drawn to a lot of my botanical decks. I'm doing a lot of deck studies, really just returning to the foundation of my practice. And I just haven't really been feeling very drawn to working with this deck currently. As I said, this is more of like a shadow work, more for empowerment, for times where I'm really struggling with feeling empowered. I tend to maybe feel more vulnerable. And I'm really struggling with a personal situation. I like to work with this deck to really see the power that I have in that particular situation. And I think decks like this are so excellent for if you're looking to do that type of work, if you're struggling with a situation in your life, and you feel a lack of power in that situation. And maybe you want to look at the brighter side, or you just want to be able to see and understand where you're actually empowered in that situation. This is an excellent deck for that. And the Femme Fatale is an excellent archetype for that. Anyway, I digress. So I want to move to the next deck. So this is the Woodland Wardens deck. So I revealed recently on the channel that I've struggled with this deck in the past because the guidebook doesn't really resonate for me. And that's just my personal experience. I have my own animal correspondences that I like to work with. And I've spoken a lot on the channel about that. You can find a lot of this information online if you're looking for any particular animal associations, but I like to also think about personal situations and experiences that you've had with certain animals. You can also work with the animal energy that way, and to work with your guides, of course. Your guides, if you ask them for help with any particular animal associations, like if you keep repeatedly seeing the same animal, you can ask for clarity from your guides. They'll deliver for sure. So as I did say, I've really struggled with this guidebook. There are a couple of guidebook meanings that just didn't resonate for me. I do believe recently on the channel I revealed that the death, there's a moth card in here that in the guidebook it mentioned the death card. There was like a connection between the moth card and the death card in tarot. The moth, here it is, the moth card. The moth and eucalyptus, an ending. But in the guidebook, it mentioned the death card as being almost like this abrupt ending or change, is a better way to put it. And I don't really view the death card and the death energy as an abrupt ending or change, abrupt change. To me, typically the death card is something that it's come to its course naturally. It's like there's a decaying process that occurs with the death card. So it doesn't really usually just pop out of nowhere. That would be more like the Tower card to me. The Tower is typically something very abrupt. It's very sudden and it's very fast. The death card is something more gradual. It's just something coming to its natural course, its natural conclusion. And it doesn't usually just throw me, like it doesn't come out of nowhere. Like, it's something that takes time. It's a little bit slower of an energy. So I don't really resonate with the guidebook. I've noticed that. So because I struggled working with this deck because of that. I never really wanted to pick up the deck. I didn't quite feel like I understood it until I just released that. And then I allowed myself to create my own associations with this card using the information that I already had about animals. And again, a lot of this information is easily accessible. There's a lot of books written about animal correspondences. And of course you can use your own personal information, your own personal experiences with certain animals, pets, or even just personal experiences that you've had, encounters with animals out in the wild. I always like to think about when you first see an animal or an insect, what are the common associations for that animal? So sorry, my throat's really dry. I always like to think of, like, for example, an owl. Most people will see an owl and immediately think of their association with wisdom. Owls have been linked to wisdom for centuries, as well as the night, the moon. There are quite a few other associations. The feminine, the dark feminine. And frogs, for example, here we have the frog and the lotus. The frogs are associated with, I find them as really occupying that threshold between water and earth. They're sort of in this liminal space because they can spend much of their time on land as well as in the water. So I really like to work with them that way. They're also symbols of transformation and metamorphosis. I actually had a recent experience with a duck where I've realized that ducks really, at least the ones here, they really enjoyed the rain. I always see them out and about just having the time of their life when it's raining, whereas everybody else is it's typically very unhappy that it's raining. A lot of people dislike the rain, and I like to kind of work with that as a symbol of just really seizing the moment and just looking on the bright side of things, really taking that opportunity to enjoy a moment when most people don't enjoy that moment. I hope that makes sense, but to see the good in things. But this is the Woodland Wardens Oracle. This is a beautiful deck. It's a wonderful deck to get to know, to form your own associations. And I encourage you to be creative with it, take liberties with it. And it's trial and error, and to really work with your intuition when you're creating this language, right? Because we're talking about really to work with the tarot and the oracle as a living, breathing system. It grows, it changes over time, just like us. And it's one of the ways that I really like to embrace the tarot and oracle. And I particularly have a fondness for oracle because it's just easier to work with intuitively, as it doesn't typically have a set structure. I find that it's easier to work with intuitively, just like I said. Although some guidebook creators create a system for that oracle deck. Of course, I'm not really talking about that. So most decks, I can just pick the deck up and pull a card out and I can work with it intuitively. These decks, however, I really have to work with the guidebook. So this is the Queen Mab Oracle. This is a Tess Whitehurst deck, I believe. Yeah, it's a blue angel. But this deck has some very beautiful artwork, a good mix of both light and dark in this deck, but this deck is all about empowerment. There is nudity in this deck, by the way. But I would recommend that you work with the guidebook. This is a deck that I do work a lot with the guidebook. What I like to do is I'll pull a card and then I will read the guidebook and then I will note in my journal what pops out in the guidebook. And then I will write about what intuitively pops up to me after reading the journal, the guidebook entry. And I write down what pops out to me in that paragraph. I will write what intuitively pops up. Because when you're working with these more shadow work focused decks, and this one and the next one after this one are more shadow work focused, you do have to be willing to work with your intuition. And I do find that it is very important to really write down in your journal what is popping up, like why certain perhaps phrases in the guidebook or in that paragraph are popping out to you and what you think it's referring to, like why it's really popping out to you, and what experiences it's probably speaking about in your life, why you pulled that card for that day. So this is the Queen Mab Oracle. So lastly, I did want to talk about the Lantern Oracle. This is one of my favorite decks. This is a deck that really stands out in my collection whenever I need to do some shadow work. So I can't remember if there's nudity in this deck, sorry. And again, shadow work to me is very seasonal, and I'm not doing shadow work currently, so it's been a while since I pulled this deck out. But I do have to mention it here because I think I need water. Because this is an excellent deck if you're looking to study, if you're looking for a deck study and you don't mind studying a guidebook. So there's journal prompts in this deck, if I remember correctly. There's a guardian message. And there's a lot of very useful information about each card. There's a good amount of information. So what I like to do, and there's even activities, like there's for here, radical self-acceptance. There's an activity that you can do. But how I like to work with this deck is I like to read the guidebook entry for the card that I pull. And then I will write up journal prompts based off of the information in the guidebook entry for that card. Sorry, I'm just pulling out a previous journal where I did work with this deck quite closely. I created journal prompts based off of anything in the guidebook entry that really popped out to me. And I would write about, again, how I felt it related to my personal situation. That's pretty much how I like to work with my shadow work decks, particularly these two decks I find phenomenal at really helping. Like, this one's great for empowerment, and this one is just great for shadow work, just all around shadow work. And really just helping you come to terms with emotions that you might be struggling with. I oftentimes will find that whenever I work with the Lantern Oracle, a lot of emotions come up about particular situations and experiences that I've had, oftentimes in my childhood, which is one of the main ways that I like to do shadow work. Is it's like child's, what's it called? Inner child work, that's it. Which I do have a very old series on the channel about if you're interested, but again, it's not something that I'm actively doing at the moment. It's not something I tend to do around the spring, which is currently it's spring at the time of filming this video. So that is the Lantern Oracle, the Queen Mab Oracle as well. So again, these are the more shadow work, guidebook heavy decks that I find. I do need to read the guidebook for these decks, but I can also write, like, journal intuitively about what pops up in the guidebook. So still worth sharing in this video. However, the focus more is, again, just working with your decks intuitively, creating your own language with your decks. And again, I love Oracle. I have a preference for Oracle in this situation. I just find them so much easier to work with intuitively. What I recommend if you are looking to study an Oracle deck is to choose something that has a lot of imagery and symbolism in it that you feel intuitively drawn to and you feel that you can read intuitively, is what I'm trying to say. Of course, you have to feel very drawn to the imagery, the artwork. It really has to stand out to you, in my opinion, and it has to be something that you feel a connection to or you can create a connection with. I would also recommend a journal, of course, any form or any way that you can record your entries. I also recommend maybe not daily draws, but some sort of regular practice working with your cards, getting to know them, and whatever rituals you like to do to get to know a deck. Some people like to edge their decks. Some people like to sleep with their decks under their pillows. To engage in any rituals that you like to engage in order for you to feel like it's easier for you to create a relationship with that deck. So, of course, regular use, and of course, I like handwriting because, of course, there's been a lot of research that shows that you're more likely to retain that information if you write it down. But I understand that's not accessible to everybody. I do recommend that you have some way of recording your daily entries, whatever intuitively pops up to you or pops up for you when you review the card, when you look at the card after you've pulled it for the day. And to talk about what in the imagery specifically pops out to you. But anyway, I think that this is an excellent place to end the video. I feel like my brain is just absolutely fried at this point anyway, so I hope that you got something out of this video. I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comment section below what oracle decks you like to study, and I will see you in the next video. Have a good one. Bye.